So, hey there, friends. This is actually the intro before the intro because I just spent an hour recording 2 episodes of SelfKind, the podcast for highly sensitive people. And then I went to edit them and I realized I was looking at completely the wrong camera the entire time. So, in the video, I'm looking over here where I think the camera is, and actually the camera is here. So I sat with that for a minute. I took a few deep breaths and I decided that the kindest thing that I could do was just leave it because the actual episodes are perfectly fine. I'm just looking in the wrong direction. So I wanted to take this little moment to make eye contact and to just let you know that, yeah, not ideal. I see what I did there. I don't know how I managed to do a full hour of recording without acknowledging and noticing that mishap, but I did. And I would even like to say that that's unusual, but it's not. I do these things all the time. And so here we are. The next episode that you're about to watch is a little B-roll, like you're going to watch me from the side. I was making great eye contact right down the barrel of that camera, but you will never see it. So I apologize, but I hope that you really enjoy the episode. Hello there, friends, and welcome to this episode of SelfKind with me, your host, Erica Webb. So this is the first episode of SelfKind for 2026, and I thought that it could be a fun idea to do a little bit of a reintroduction of sorts and just to talk about why this podcast exists. I started this podcast back in 2020, and so this, I guess, is the 6th year, or it's been going for 6 years. That math should be easy. Anyway, it's been going for a really long time, well over 300 episodes under my belt. And I noticed this year when I did my Spotify Wrapped, there's one for creators, and it showed that my audience size had increased by 999%, which just goes to show you how small it started. But I thought, you know what, there will be some of you jumping in at this point as new listeners who really don't know a lot about what led me here. And so I thought maybe we would use this episode to bring you up to speed, to talk a little bit about why this podcast exists, how it's evolved, how I've ended up where I've ended up, and what I'm here to support other people with. So if you are new around here, welcome. I find that when I go to record podcast episodes, particularly now that I'm doing video, which I've been doing for a really long time, there is this sense of you've got to grab people's attention and you've got to get, moving and you've got to be fast. And something that I'm really trying to do this year is not fall into that narrative. I've fallen a little bit out of love with some social media recently, and I think it's for that reason, because it's kind of I don't want to constantly be trying to stop traffic. I don't want to be feeling this sense of urgency all the time, which can be an experience that highly sensitive people have anyway. So I'm not going to attempt to rush. I'm just going to tell you a story and share with you. So if you need to put it on 1.5 times speed or double speed, you do you. Welcome to the podcast. It's SelfKind. It's a podcast for highly sensitive people, and it hasn't always been that way. So when I started the podcast back in 2020, I was a yoga teacher and a somatic exercise coach, and really just wanting to talk about movement and the connection between mind and body and living in alignment with feeling kind of well in your own skin. And I've always known myself to be a highly sensitive person. But it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago that I really thought, these are the sorts of people that I'm here to support. They're the sorts of people who show up for my classes. They're the sorts of people that I sort of constantly seem to have in my space. And so I want to speak directly to highly sensitive people. Because my experience of being a highly sensitive person has been that has been one of the hardest things for me to come to terms with. Not that I am highly sensitive, but that it puts certain realities in place, right? Now, back about 6 months ago, was diagnosed autistic ADHD. And there is a little bit of a narrative around, and there has been a narrative around for a long time, around are highly sensitive people just autistic? Are we talking about the same thing through a different lens? And the honest truth is I don't know the answer to that question. I think that a lot of the highly sensitive people that I work with suspect that they might be autistic, ADHD, or a combination of both. Some of the people that kind of present as highly sensitive are sensitive because of past trauma. And some are born that way, and some are born that way and become more sensitive because of the trauma that they've faced. And some highly sensitive people probably are undiagnosed autistic or ADHD or both. And it only matters so much as it matters to you. So when I talk about being a highly sensitive person, one thing that I do want to point out is that I'm talking about being a highly sensitive person through the lens of also being autistic ADHD. And so that's my only experience. However, I didn't know that I was autistic ADHD until I was 42 years old. And so I've trying to kind of put those pieces together and figure out what that really means. And like, what is the autism? What is ADHD? What is trauma? What is, who knows? How do you untangle all of that? I'm not sure. So I just want to point that out, that whilst this is sort of, marketed as a podcast for highly sensitive people, highly sensitive and neurodivergent folk, and I would absolutely put high sensitivity into the neurodivergence bucket. It's not my job to do that. That's just a personal take. But it, diverges from the norm. We are the minority in the collective. And so I kind of put it in the same bucket anyway. So anyway, where were we going with this? Podcast for highly sensitive neurodivergent people. And as I mentioned, I have this background in movement. And for me, I came to movement after a series of many years in very different spaces, non-movement related at all, where I was really trying to make it. I had this very curious mind. I had a lot of ambition, but I found myself constantly burning out and feeling like I couldn't fit into the spaces that I was trying to fit into, feeling like I couldn't keep up with what was expected of me, even though kind of, I guess, mentally, cognitively, I could do the work. I found myself burnt out over and over again. And I'd been doing yoga for a really long time. And what I realized was that I just loved it. I loved being in that space where all I had to think about was my body moving, where I put my foot, how it felt when I moved my shoulder in this particular way. And it was probably the only time that I really felt myself slow down. That internal chatter, that internal indecision and frustration that I felt all of the time really became more peaceful when I was doing yoga. And so I ended up doing that for a career. And I've been a yoga teacher for, I guess it's coming up to 16 years, a somatic exercise coach for a little less than that. And over time, that became, how I spent a lot of my time was teaching yoga, thinking about yoga, being this sort of yoga teacher. But I still really struggled. I still really, really struggled with a lot of self-loathing. And a lot of that came from this sensitive system that I was living in where, I would jump from interest to interest, which, hello ADHD, I would feel things so deeply that I'd often kind of come unstuck. I found social situations really challenging. I was always really preoccupied with am I doing the right thing with my face? Am I doing the right thing with my body? What am I supposed to do with my hands? I found myself burning so much energy just doing normal things. And I thought, just get your shit together. What is wrong with you? This is not that hard. I remember when my kids were really little, I struggled so much with just going to the grocery store. And that was something that I struggled with anyway, but add little kids into the mix. And that was suddenly, everything was falling apart. And I just remember feeling so broken because I looked around myself and I thought, everybody else just seems to know what they're doing, and they can go and do the groceries and they can cook dinner and they can do all these things and they just do it. And it's not kind of like their whole day has to be organized around this one trip to the grocery store and the planning that goes into getting things into a bag to take your kids out of the house. And so I really created this environment for myself where I was always wrong. I was always wrong. I was never doing enough. I was never trying hard enough, even though I was trying so bloody hard. But on the outside, to the rest of the world, people thought I really had my shit together. People really seemed to think that I kind of knew what I was doing, and I really didn't know what I was doing, and I felt broken all the time. I never felt like I fit in. When I go back even further and think about what I was like in school, like I cried every single day, particularly in primary school, but even high school. Those environments just consistently burnt me out, but I didn't have the language for it. I didn't have, the skills to navigate that, because who does, right, at that age? I even had a memory the other day where I was reminded that when I was in primary school, I had this toy. And this toy I had won in a carnival game. So I think we'd been to, a carnival show, like the Melbourne show or something like that. And I won this soft toy, and it was in the shape of like a pencil, like a grey lead pencil. And this is awful, but it was the 90s, I guess. Whenever I would take that toy to bed, I would wake up unwell. I don't know what was in it, but probably nothing good. I would wake up with like a cough, and I mean, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was the most foolish decision. But I would do this. I would sleep with this toy. I would bring it into bed with me at night when I just couldn't handle the thought of going to school the next day. And that was kind of my way of navigating things for a really long time. Not always with that pencil toy, but kind of getting to that point where it was like, okay, I don't have a choice. I can stop now because my body has said stop. I wasn't very good at taking control, I guess, and saying like, I can't do this today. And so I can remember countless times going into work unwell, pre-COVID days, to be fair. I think a lot of us did that. But really pushing and not knowing when to stop. And I think part of that came from not really knowing what kind of like a normal baseline felt like, because I think I was always constantly dysregulated. And the reason that I'm telling you all this is because I want you to know like who you're in the company of. I want you to know that I really, really understand what it's like to feel hypersensitive in a world that just doesn't seem to fit. I want you to know that I know what it feels like to not have the skills to advocate for yourself. And that, I really used that reality as a way of demonizing myself and of punishing myself and of making myself wrong for like such a long time. And it's something that I think I'm still navigating, right? I think sometimes, I work as a counselor as well as a yoga teacher these days. And one thing that I find with clients that's pretty consistent across the board is that highly sensitive people often don't feel like they're doing enough, even though we're often the ones taking on way more than others, and drowning. And I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I think there is this sense of, yeah, just always feeling like we don't quite measure up. We don't quite do enough. And so that's very much been my experience. I've always been very aware of my flaws, always been aware of my shortcomings. And the mental rumination that comes with that has been a huge source of exhaustion. When I was younger, that constant dysregulation meant that I often was at the doctor. I remember in my teens and early 20s having like MRIs and seeing osteopaths and chiropractors and acupuncturists and just trying to figure out why my body never felt good. And so it made a lot of sense why I ended up in this world of movement, because I found something that helped my body to feel much more comfortable. But I was still sort of stuck in this self-critical loop where I could never measure up. I could never do enough. I could never be enough. I felt so defective. And it all kind of came to a head when I was the mum of young kids, and I realized that I just wasn't functioning very well at all. And that's really what led me to working with self-compassion. I didn't know it at the time, but I worked with a really beautiful, wonderful coach who truly changed my life. And I don't know if her intention was to teach me self-compassion, but that is certainly what came of it. And that sort of became the undercurrent for everything that I do. So this podcast is called SelfKind, my online space where I teach somatic exercise classes and gentle yoga and do some other things. It's called the SelfKind Hub. My business name is SelfKind, because the thing that made the biggest difference to my relationship with myself and my body was actually treating it with kindness. And that ultimately is why this podcast exists, because being kind to ourselves often is not the default for highly sensitive and neurodivergent people. We seem to have this feeling that we need to push ourselves harder and harder and harder to try to keep up and measure up. And it just doesn't work. Like, the ultimate outcome of that is always going to be burnout. It's always going to be exhaustion. It's always going to be that we can't ever prove ourselves because we are flawed humans. All of us, not just highly sensitive humans, right? We're all flawed. We will all make mistakes. We will all mess up. We will all feel like we're never kind of quite measuring up if that's the view that we take. Whereas when we can step into self-compassion and self-kindness, suddenly our own internal space becomes a much more comfortable place to exist. It becomes a much softer place to land. And so when I put those two pieces together, my body felt more comfortable because movement allowed that. And then my actual inner experience of being in myself became more comfortable because it wasn't this kind of like unpoliced place where, I just had free rein to beat myself up all the time. It became a place where the criticism was met with this kind of voice that said, "Ooh, I don't think we want to do that," right? This is not the kind of relationship that I want to have with myself. And so that was where this intersection of the mind and body came together for me. And that really changed everything. And I say it changed everything and I'm mindful that sounds like I came up with like some solution that meant I never felt terrible again. And that is honestly not true. You may have heard me allude to some trauma that I've had in recent times. And, at the moment, as I'm recording this, I'm pretty exhausted. Not just today, but this sort of period of my life has been quite a tiring, trying time. Back in 2024, I learned that the father who had raised me is not my biological dad. And there's other episodes where I go into more of that, so I won't go into it here, but I've been navigating like PTSD symptoms and relationship challenges and like a real identity breakdown. And so those tools that I have of movement and self-kindness, they have been very necessary, and it's still been a really hard time. And so I'm not here to say that I have the answer to struggle. What I definitely have experienced, though, is that there are these tools that allow my experience of myself to be softer, even when everything feels hard. And I think it's an ever-evolving experience. One thing that comes up as someone who works in sort of the well-being space is it's really easy to feel like a hypocrite because you think, geez, like I'm sharing all these tools with people, and yet there are days where I am so sad, and there are days where I do really struggle with self-criticism, and there are days where I don't know if, I don't get on my yoga mat, or I don't do the things that I say that like I recommend other people to do. And I mean, that's just human, And so one thing that I do absolutely kind of promise on this podcast and in this space and in all the work that I do is that I really meet you as a human, not as somebody who sits on a pedestal and says, "Oh, you know what? I've got it all figured out." Because quite frankly, I don't. That would be a lie. But what I do have is a lot of life experience with a lot of tricky things, and a relationship with myself that at its core really is kind and compassionate. For a long time, I hated myself, and I would say that, and I would hear that, and it didn't feel good, but it felt very true. And now I don't always like myself like every minute of every day, but I really do love myself, and I really do care, and I do really care about my experience and how I feel. And so that is a huge transformation. And it doesn't mean that life comes with no bumps, but it does make the bumps a little easier to navigate, even when easier is still hard. So that's a little bit about, how come this podcast exists. Podcasts? I think I just put an S on the end of that. But that's a little bit about why the podcast exists, a little bit about its evolution, a little bit about my evolution. And I have spoken about all of these things before. And every time I record a podcast, I find myself being like, oh, am I just repeating myself? And if you've listened to this for a while, you would have heard me say that before. Like, I think I've said this before. But the reality is I am going to repeat myself, and I'm learning to stop apologizing for that. Because often we have to hear things over and over and over again. And I want to sort of just offer up how real that is, because when I record podcasts, when I, do programs with people and classes with people, I am receiving, at the same time. I do this work because it continues to be the work that I need to. And no, I'm not the one on the receiving end of work when I'm working with one-on-one clients and counseling and whatnot, although I learn a lot from my clients. But like, I'm in this as well. I don't think that we get to this point where, I sit on the top of the mountain and then just, direct people below me. That's so gross. And that will never be how I approach this work. We're all kind of muddling our way through this human thing together. And that's what I really want to, I guess, share in this episode is I am so human, and I am so grateful that you tune in to listen to what I have to say as I work things out and as I share the things that have worked for me and have worked for my clients, and that, that the science shows us work as well. So I very much take this kind of lived experience combined with what does the science say? What does the literature say? What tends to work? And then how do we make it so that we're kind of like really tailoring things to our specific situation, our specific scenario? Because even if you are highly sensitive and neurodivergent in the same way I am, you're still going to be different, right? We're all different. We all come with our own version of that high sensitivity or that neurodivergence, with the things that have a tendency to cluster with that, right? So it's not unusual to be neurodivergent and to deal with chronic health issues. It's not unusual to be highly sensitive and to deal with chronic pain. Sometimes these things cluster. It's not a given, but it is often an experience that people have. And so all of those variables mean that we are experiencing something that is very unique, but often there are elements that are shared. And one thing that I am very happy to do is to be vulnerable, to share my stories, to share my experiences, if it helps you to feel less alone. Because I know not everybody has that privilege. I know not everybody can speak up and talk about how things are for them, because there are real repercussions for that. But I am able to do that. And I take, I'm pleased that I can. Doesn't mean that I don't have vulnerability hangovers after I record. I absolutely do. But I think there's something so incredibly powerful in being able to see that, oh, it's not just me that feels like that. And that is what keeps me going. That is why 330 something episodes later, I'm still recording, because I get messages where people say, I thought it was just me. And it's not, it's not just you. You are not broken. You are not faulty. You are not messing everything up. But I know so clearly what it feels like to believe that. And so I just want to end this episode by saying thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing this with people that you think will resonate. As it is the beginning of the year, 2026, can you believe that? I really can't. I'm starting to think about, what will we talk about this year? And so next episode, I'm going to share a little bit about how I've approached sort of this new year transition. It's not with goals, because I decided this year goals are out for me. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've navigated that and offer you some ideas if you'd like them. But I would love to hear from you about, what are the questions that you want answered this year? What are the things that you're like, I'm curious to know about this, or how does a highly sensitive person navigate that? Or, I think I might be autistic. What now? I would love to hear what you want to hear, because it matters to me. I'm not just doing this to hear my own voice because goodness knows I hear it a lot. But I would love to know what would be most supportive to you. Now, I want to share just a few resources with you in terms of places that you can get more information. One really cool resource that I would love to point you towards is High Sensitivity Australia. Now, obviously, there's Australia in the name of that, and I know not everybody watching or listening is from Australia, but myself and my colleague Matt Glover, back, I guess it was last year, launched High Sensitivity Australia, which is an online Facebook group at the moment, but it's also a space offline where we will be running different things for highly sensitive people through the lens of what it is to be sensitive within this sort of Australian context. So I'll pop a link in the show notes for where you can come and find us there. We have a blog as well, and the really lovely thing about that space is that Matt offers a different perspective to me, and then we have some shared perspectives that we offer as well. And we run high sensitivity primers throughout the year where you can learn about what does it mean to be highly sensitive, and you can ask questions of both of us. Those have proven to be really popular, and we really enjoy those. The other thing that you can check out is how to work with me one-on-one. So I do offer one-on-one counselling for highly sensitive and neurodivergent people. I offer that online and in person. I am working just with people within Australia. Other countries are negotiable, but United States and Canada, unfortunately, because of insurance stuff, are out. But if you're looking for a counsellor who really gets what it's like to be sensitive, neurodivergent, to kind of experience, I've got a chronic illness, I've got other things going on as well, who kind of really understands that. I am working with other highly sensitive people, and I'm also working with people who have had DNA surprises. So people who are donor conceived, late discovery donor conceived people, and other people who've had DNA surprises after doing an ancestry test. So if any of that is of interest, you can absolutely reach out to me to inquire about one-on-one counselling sessions. And finally, the SelfKind Hub, where I teach movement and some of this more mind-based stuff within a library where you can kind of choose your own adventure. We also do live stream classes almost every single week. And so that's a really awesome space if you're looking for community, but while you're still sort of within your own space. So you don't have to leave home to come and join the classes, but really gentle movement that helps you to connect back to your body and to find comfort there, as well as coming at it from that other angle that I spoke about finding that comfort by being on your own side. So really that whole mind-body connection. All right, that's enough for now. I will leave it at that. I'll pop all the links for things that I spoke about in the show notes. Please do hit me up with your questions and suggestions for content this year, because I would love, 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 love to hear from you. You can find me over on Instagram at ericawebb_selfkind, or you can email me via my website, ericawebb.com.au. All right, until next time, keep being kind to yourselves.